Good morning. My name is Michela. I represent Servizi Europei Malta, and I welcome you to this information session on the Equipment and Machinery Scheme for SMEs. Today we'll be joined both by my colleague Andrea from Servizi Europei Malta, who will be explaining to you more about our services, and then Mr. Mark Muscat from the Measures and Support Division, who will be going into more detail about this funding scheme and how you can benefit from it. I give the floor now to Andrea. Maybe Andrea can just flip the slide if possible. Perfect. So just some house rules. It's important that you keep your microphones off and your cameras on if possible. You can ask your questions directly in the chat, and these will be moderated. Please refrain from asking questions that are very specific to your company or your project. And if you have any further queries, feel free to contact us directly on email on info.sem@gov.mt, and there we can reply. I give the floor now to my colleague Andrea.
Hello, good morning, everyone. So for my part of the presentation, I'll be going over who we are as SCM, Servizi Europei Malta, and the services that we offer. So firstly, we are a gateway to EU funds and Motangozo, and here our primary goal is to act as our main entry point for organizations when it comes to EU funding. So here, organizations that have any questions related to EU funding, how they can benefit, and any other general questions that an organization might have with regards to EU funding, they can approach us first, and we can guide them to provide them with an answer to any question they might have, and also provide them with our services if they have a project idea that is viable for a particular EU funding call. So we provide information, but then we also have very much specific services related to the support directly on EU funding. And here, these are some of the services that we have that we offer as an organization. So firstly, we provide information sessions similar to this one. We collaborate with a number of different managing authorities to provide these information sessions. And here we provide information not just on our services, but also technical aspects of the different funding programs and funding calls that are available. And this is our means, is a way by which we can provide information directly to organizations and that might have an interest in a particular funding program. Then we provide training sessions, and these training sessions are a bit more technical when compared to the information sessions, as they are more focused on the project application process and also the implementation process. So we currently provide two different training programs throughout the year, one focusing on how to write and develop a successful EU-funded project, and the second one is on how to implement a successfully funded project. The third way we can assist organizations is through one-to-one meetings, and here is where an organization might have certain questions on the funding call or funding project idea, and we can organize a meeting with them to discuss what kind of opportunities that organization might be interested in, or also discuss any questions that they might have through a meeting. Then we go into one of our prime services, which is the application writing. Here, if an organization has a strong project and a good project that is viable under a new funding call, we can assist in the writing of the application form so that it is submitted. So this is submitted on time. And then finally, we have our project implementation support, where if an organization has been successfully granted EU funding, then we provide support during the implementation process. and here. So now we're going to go a bit more on the project development aspect. When it comes to project development, this goes in hand with the project writing support that we provide, where here we discuss with an organization the needs that their project would need to fit in to a particular funding call. So if an organization approaches us with a project idea, and we find a funding call that meets that project idea, we start working with the organization on how to develop their project to be in line with that particular funding call. We sometimes funding calls would not directly match a particular project idea, but then we can work with the organization on how to amend their project idea to fit more with the eligibility criteria of the funding call and develop the project a bit more so it is more related to the funding call which would have selected. From there, we also develop different aspects of the funding call to meet the required questions of the application form. So we start developing the activities with the organization, the needs analysis, the objectives, and the different requirements that the application call might have. And this falls more into the structure of the project. So here it is more based on developing that structure of the project. And in order to make it a bit stronger and more related to the funding call itself. Project writing, when it comes to project writing, we offer 3 kinds of services. And the first one is vetting with comments. When it comes to vetting with comments, here we're referring where an organization develops the application form itself and then sends it to us, where we can provide feedback through comments on the application form. And then like that, the organization can amend their application form based on the comments that we provide. The second type of service that we provide when it comes to project writing is vetting with amendments, where here, again, the organization develops the application form itself, it can send it to us, and then we can amend certain sections. So we're not just providing comments, but we're amending certain sections that we feel aren't as strong. And then we can use our experience to structure the application form in a better format. And then finally, vetting with completion, where here we assist very much hands-on the organization in the writing of the application form, and we develop and write a number of different sections ourselves based on the information that the organization provides us. With certain project proposals can be a bit technical and be a bit more specific in a particular sector, which we might not have technical expertise on. And there, from that aspect, you can provide us with the technical expertise and information related directly to the subject matter. And then we use that information to organize it in the application form and structure it as we see fit. When it comes to project implementation support, something that we continually do is we provide informative documents to organizations to facilitate the implementation process. We provide key documents on how to implement different aspects of their project. These are documents that we develop in-house, and they are based on the experience that we have. The second aspect is also where we support the organization on different phases of their project, such as the reporting aspect, the procurement aspect, and we can assist the organizations on how to facilitate and answer any questions that they might have in the process of the implementation of their project. And then we provide guidance throughout the lifetime of the project. So if you are awarded the project, your funding under the project, you can contact us, and at times we are also contacting you immediately to help you start out the process. Most of the organizations that do apply for your funding, once they are awarded the project, get stuck as to how they are going to start the process of the implementation. And that's where we can come in and immediately start explaining the process of signing the grant agreement, helping you in that process, and then immediately starting on the actual assistance on any questions that you might have during the implementation phase. That's from my end, that's it. I leave the floor to Mark.
There's two questions in the chat, Andrea. I think we can address them immediately. The first one is related to cost. There is no cost involved in benefiting from our service. So that is answered. The second one is, when referring to EU-funded projects, does this include those which are managed by local entities such as Malta Enterprise and MCST?
Yes, if they are EU funded, if they are based on EU funding, then yes, we can provide direct support in the application process.
Perfect. I hope that is clear. I think we can move on to Mark. Mark, you can, Andrea, you can unshare your screen, and then Mark can share his screen.
Excellent. You just answered my question as well. So, just perhaps if you could confirm that the screen sharing is visible to all.
Yes.
Excellent. So thanks, Andrea, thanks, Michela, and thanks above all to Servizi Ewropej f'Malta, who have organized this session as well as the one next week, in order for an explanation to be provided to the business community with regards to the Equipment and Machinery SME grant scheme. The scheme was announced last week, and it will trigger from the 1st of February, which is, unless I'm mistaken, Wednesday of next week. I will now go into a little bit of detail on what the scheme can finance, the criteria, the amounts, and so on and so forth. So basically, my name is Mark Muscat. I'm a program officer within the Measures and Supports Division, which is the entity, the intermediate body, which administers these and other ERDF grant schemes intended for businessmen. Essentially, as some of you may now be aware, I beg your pardon, the 2014-2020 programming period is now coming to an end. And therefore, the decision was taken to set aside 2 million for this particular scheme to be used by beneficiaries which are ready to implement projects which are not of a particular large dimensions and which can be finalized relatively quickly. Essentially, the success of a business is dependent on the ability of an enterprise to focus its investment on expanding or innovating its operations, and therefore the scheme is intended to assist initial investments in either expanding or diversifying an enterprise's output or innovating its output, as well as supporting initial investments by an enterprise. Essentially, what this scheme can finance, and hence the name, is the purchase of equipment and machinery, but the equipment and machinery has to be directly improving the productivity of an enterprise. I'll get into a little bit more detail on the difference in the next slides. Eligible enterprises would be companies, partnerships, self-employed individuals, and cooperatives. And they need to be registered with the respective authority. In the case of a partnership or of a company, a limited liability company, they would need to be registered with the Malta Business Registry. In the case of a cooperative, they need to be registered with the Cooperative Authority as well. And in the case of a self-employed individual, they need to be registered with Jobs Plus. The scheme is covered by the de minimis state aid regulation. I see a few familiar names here who I have no doubt are aware of the concept behind the de minimis regulation, but I will explain it for the benefit of others who don't. Essentially, the scheme regulates the kind of aid that can be given to enterprises, and it limits enterprises to be given a maximum of 200,000 euros over a period of 3 fiscal years, which essentially means that the total amount received in 2021, 2022, and 2023 cannot exceed this amount. Now to the more important part of this slide. The minimum funding grant to be given under the scheme shall be 10,000 euros and a maximum of 120 euros. Aid intensity for project based in Malta shall be 50%, whereas for those based in Gozo shall be 60%. The scheme shall be administered through an open rolling call with periodical cut-off dates. I'm going to get this in a further slide, which means that if you do not make it in time to submit an application by a particular cut-off date, it will be taken into consideration with the next cut-off date, and so on and so forth. For those of you who are familiar with our other business enhanced schemes, the main differences in terms of simplification are as follows. First of all, no business plan at all is required. At application stage, we will require 3 quotations to be submitted with the application. And there is no need to provide or submit the full financial statements. And if in previous calls, in previous schemes, there were a number of mandatory documents which, if they were not provided at application stage, would result in an application being rejected. This is no longer the case, and applicants are able to rectify any and all documents uploaded at application stage. I've already explained the eligible action, which shall be investment in equipment and or machinery, which is considered as directly contributing to improving the productivity of the enterprise. Now I'm going to expand a little bit on this in order to give a couple of practical examples to assist understanding of what is meant by this specific aspect. This is not tied to a specific item per se. However, it is tied with what the item will actually be contributing. Let's use an example of a television. Let's say that an applicant wishes to furnish 3 rooms in their boutique hotels and they wish to install a television. Now, an argument could be made, and that is what the application is there for. An argument could be made that the inclusion of a television in the boutique hotel room makes it a more attractive aspect, and therefore it is directly contributing to improving the productivity of the boutique hotel per se. So that would be, yes, potentially an eligible cost. However, if you are in an office environment and you want to install a television in the reception area, it is much harder to make the argument that it is improving the productivity of the enterprise, because in reality, it isn't. It's an ancillary item. So that is what needs to be kept in mind in terms of eligible actions. Another thing to be kept in mind means that any applicants would not be allowed to exceed the 3-month implementation period. Essentially, this means that once a grant agreement has been signed after the application has been approved, the beneficiary then has a maximum of 3 months to purchase, have in place, delivered, have operational, and have paid for all the items included with the application. This is especially to be kept in mind in view of the fact that the programs are coming to a close and the items cannot take a long time to be delivered, installed, and paid for. Now, something which is also slightly different from our other schemes is that there can be only 3 sub-activities, only 3 items. You can have multiple of the same item, but you cannot have more than 3 different items. To use an example, if a restaurant operator wishes to buy 4 fridges and 3 freezers and 3 fridges, those would fall as 3 separate items, although there are multiple of them. Within the guidance notes of the schemes, there are a number of exclusions with regards to enterprises and the sector that they operate in. Among the ones which are excluded from aid via the scheme are interventions by enterprises within the transport sector, within the online gaming sector, within the real estate sector, and there are a number of other exclusions. It's important that prospective applicants do take the time to have a look at them to save themselves a bit of frustration in potentially misunderstanding whether they are eligible or not. As outlined a little bit earlier, the scheme will open on the 1st of February, that is next week. And at present, 6 cutoff dates have been announced, as outlined in the table above, which means that there are 2 cutoff dates a month until April. Depending on budget availability, the scheme might be extended for a further period. However, my recommendation would definitely be that if you are interested in applying, you don't leave it till later, because you would be restricting yourself with the length of implementation period, as well as opening up yourself up to the possibility of the funds being exhausted. Now, I'm going to what is actually required to be submitted at application stage. For every item that is being requested, the applicant has to submit the minimum technical specifications. Earlier, I mentioned ovens, fridges, freezers. There are different types of ovens, different type of freezers, different type of fridges, and therefore the applicant needs to say, this is the kind of fridge that I am looking for. It is not brand specific, but specific to the specifications, the requirements of what you want the item to provide. For every item that you want to receive aid for, you need to provide us with 3 quotations. Now, there is the word 3 compliant quotations. If you say that you want fridges to be, I don't know, freeze between 0 and 4 degrees, and the fridges that you provide us a quote for say that they will cool up to 2 to 6 degrees, for the sake of the argument purely here, it might be the case that it's not considered a compliant quotation, because it does not necessarily address the technical specifications that you yourself have identified. So it's important that the 3 quotations that you provide are comparable. And the way that the scheme works is that, yes, you do provide 3 quotations. Yes, once, and obviously if approved, you can go out and buy any one of those 3 quotations. However, the amount that you will be paid will be pegged to the cheapest one. After all, these are national and EU funds, and therefore value for money has to be sought. A de minimis declaration has also to be provided. Essentially, this means that an applicant has to provide us with a list of all state aid that they have received over the past 3 years, in order for us to be able to ascertain that the minimum, that the maximum of 200,000 has not been exceeded. Another declaration to be provided is available with the application itself, which is completely to be submitted online, which declaration has to be printed, signed, scanned, and uploaded. Other documents which are required include the tax compliance certificates, which can be acquired from the Office of the Commissioner for Revenue, which indicate that no tax is pending and no liabilities are due with respect to income tax, VAT, and if applicable, FSS. The financial statements also have to be provided. Now, the reason that the as applicable is written down there is that enterprises, companies are obliged to submit their accounts to the Malta Business Registry. If they are included on, if accounts dated within the last 2 years are uploaded on the Malta Business Registry, they technically do not need to be provided with the application. For self-employed individuals, we would need to get the income tax returns for the past 2 years as certified by an accountant. Moreover, if an enterprise has just started operating within the last 2 years, whether it's a company or whether they are an individual, naturally neither the income tax returns for the last 2 years nor the accounts for the last 2 years will be available. And therefore, in this regard, we would require that cash flow projections are provided, as well as a profit and loss account or income statement, as well as a balance sheet or a statement of assets and liabilities. If the intervention requires a permit, we will also need to have it provided with the application. Evidence of private match financing. Earlier in my slides, I referred to the fact that the scheme will finance 50% or 60% if you're based in Gozo, which means that you will need to fork out 50% if you're based in Malta, or 40% of the overall project total yourself. And this is the amount that we need to have evidence of. Basically, we need to make sure that you can hold up to your end of the bargain. This document can take the form of a bank statement. That's the most common and easiest document. If you do not presently have the necessary financial liquidity, we will also be satisfied if you provide us with a letter of intent from a bank that they are ready to finance the operation, the application should be successful, and also an existing sanction letter whose terms allow use of the funds for this particular item. NACE code confirmation, we will require this to ascertain that the NACE code that the applicant says they are operating in is indeed the case, as well as a Gantt chart or implementation schedule, in order for us, again, to be able to ascertain that the timelines that were laid out in the application are indeed viable and that they have been, thought about, not just something somebody woke up and decided to fling some dates at random. Go to the next slide. Now, essentially, an application is assessed in 2 different aspects: the gateway criteria and the selection criteria. The gateway criteria are the criteria in which we assess if the documents provided are there and if the applicants are the applicant themselves is actually eligible for aid. So we need to make sure that the document is the application is submitted with the correct documents in line with the guidance notes. We also need to make sure that the applicant undertaking is actually an SME, and also whether the economic sector that they operate in is not included in the exclusions, and that's where the NACE code comes in, basically. We also need to make sure, and this is an exercise undertaken from our end, from the project selection committee, which evaluates all applications received, we need to make sure that what is being applied for falls within the parameters of the scheme. So here, the board would determine that the television that I used in my previous example within the reception area is not really increasing the productivity of the enterprise and is not an eligible cost. Another thing to keep in mind is that the way that the scheme works is that you first apply with us for aid, and it is only once and if the go-ahead is given that that you can actually go out and buy the item. This is based on the concept called the incentive effect, whereas within the incentive of these funds, you would not have gone forward with buying these items, or at least not gone forward at this point in time. Essentially, this means that you cannot buy anything before. And if we have evidence in the application process that the item or items were actually purchased before, the whole project would be considered ineligible. And I also mentioned already the match financing aspect. The selection criteria assess how good and robust an application is. There are 100 marks assigned to the selection criteria. They are broken down as indicated in this slide. A further breakdown of the marks, which I'm not going to go into for reasons of time, naturally, is also included within the guidance notes, which break down how many marks are assigned to each sub-criteria within these 4 main criteria. Each of them is tied to a particular element of the application, and it is always worth keeping in mind when filling in an application how many marks are assigned to that particular section. It is not our intention to oblige you to write War and Peace in a section, firstly because we don't want to read it, and secondly because we don't want to force you. You've clearly and naturally got better things to do with your time. However, we do believe that there has to be a substantive explanation. A substantive explanation can take 2 or 3 sentences, and if it's a good substantive explanation, it can even take 1 sentence. But it's unlikely that the board will decide to give a lot of marks to a section with a 3 or 4 letter sentence. Stands to reason, naturally. And the application will need to get a minimum of 50% of these 100 marks in order to be approved for aid. Now, from my end, I believe that's the extent of my slide. I see that there are 20 questions in the chat. I don't know if if you want me to answer them or whether you want.
Yes, I think most of them can be answered by yourself. So just take a look at them and feel free to answer whichever ones you think.
Let me scroll up right to the top.
Yeah.
So I see that the first question, if the project will start next month, can we still apply afterwards? This is Simon. Now, I'm not exactly sure what he means by the project. I suspect that this question was already answered by my comment in this slide, that you have to wait for our go-ahead before actually going forward with purchasing the items. If this did not address your query, perhaps you can rephrase it, and I'll come back to it when I come down at the bottom of the list of questions. Hi, Alison. I hope the presentation was indeed being shared. Excellent. Yes. Okay. Connection problem. So Marie Mifsud asked whether it is kept for the company or it's kept per equipment. It's kept per application. So the range of minimum of 10,000 and the maximum of 120,000, they are for every single application received. So the 120,000 has to cover the maximum of 3 sub-activity. It's not a maximum of 120,000 for every item, no. Can you repeat how many quotations are required? At application stage, 3 quotations are required, and they need to be comparable and provided from unrelated suppliers. Mr. Kutaya requested that, good question, that quotations need to be, I can confirm that quotations do not necessarily need to be provided from local companies, and they actually don't have to be provided from any EU-based country. They might be based from the USA, China, Libya, UK, and anywhere else. However, it is worth keeping in mind that the further away you order it for, the more difficult it is for it to arrive within the 3-month period, as well as transportation costs are not eligible for aid through the scheme. It is only the item itself, which is the cost of the item itself, which is eligible. There are specific machines which only have 1 manufacturer. Without beating around the bush, then basically don't apply for the scheme. The scheme is intended for items where 3 quotations can be brought in hand. It is worth mentioning that although some items, equipment do have a specific agent, it is possible to get quotations from an overseas supplier or from a different supplier which provides the same machine. But I cannot stress this enough, applications for items in which 3 quotations cannot be provided will not be granted aid under the scheme. Simon's question as well was the same as Mr. Colosso's. I hope that Mr. Sherry's sound problems were resolved. Companies with financial difficulties. I don't know if perhaps Theodora can expand on the question. I'm not sure what exactly entails financial difficulty under the de minimis state regulations. So with regards to the printable document of the presentation, I think that's something that Servizzi Europei of Malta will address, and whether it will be circulated at a later stage.
Yes, I think this can be circulated. Apart from that, there's also all information uploaded to the Fondi.eu website. I will post the link to this website in the chat. It's just been posted now, and you can download all documents, notes to applicants, and a sample application form, and also the guidelines from there. So I think, yes, that's
great.
sufficient.
Thank you. I see Gilbert's question is technical specifications. Yes, the technical specifications are to be provided at application stage by the applicant themselves. They can sign them if it makes them feel better, but if it's submitted with the application, it's considered as being the applicant's own. It's important that you make sure that the technical specifications are not too overbearing, because if you set the bar too high, you might struggle to receive sufficient quotations to address them. So if you want to buy an item, specifying that you want it to be a particular color is not really necessary, because you might be perfectly happy whether it's painted in white, black, or polka dots. So that's worth keeping in mind. Does the scheme cover any software and hardware? Now, you could make the argument that yes, you can finance software and hardware under the scheme. However, under the Business Enhanced Grant Scheme, RRP grant schemes, also available on the Fondi.eu website, we have a specific scheme, the SME digitalization scheme, which I'm not going to enter into detail here because it's not the remit of this particular presentation. This SME digitalization grant scheme finances the purchase of software, both custom and off-the-shelf, hardware, analytical tools, and any other items or services which will increase the digitalization of the enterprise. So it might be worth considering applying for software and hardware under that scheme. With regards to NACE code, if one's NACE code is to do with retailing, but will be diversifying into manufacturing, can we still apply for manufacturing equipment? In this particular instance, the NACE code for both retail and manufacturing would be eligible. However, the NACE code pertains to what the main current economic activity is of the applicant enterprise. So if you intend to diversify into manufacturing, your NACE code is still under retail because you haven't actually diversified yet. It's only once you diversify that your NACE code would be then in a position to be changed. If 3 quotations are presented, but the ideal fit is not the cheapest quotation, yes, as I explained in the presentation, and possibly this was written up before I explained it, yes, you will be allowed to buy whichever one of the quotations you submitted, as long as it's delivered and paid for within 3 months, but the amount to be paid will be pegged to the cheapest quotation that you provided. The NACE code will cover, in reply to Ms. Schembry's request about the NACE code not covering all the services provided, the NACE code will cover the main or primary economic activity. So you will need to check if the NACE code, if your NACE code falls within the eligible sectors or otherwise. Gilbert, is computer equipment for professional service providers eligible under the scheme? Yes, however, you would then be in a situation where can you reach the minimum amount for computer equipment? You might be best advised potentially to apply under the SME digitalization scheme for something along these lines. If the applicant is not resorting to loans as private financing, but has own money, what proof would suffice? A bank statement clearly stating the ownership of the bank account. We have had instances in other schemes where the proof provided is just a screenshot of a bank account, which might be anyone's. So we do need to have some kind of evidence that it is owned or controlled by the applicant party. Is Malta enterprise loan considered as match financing? This would fall under the concept of double financing, double funding, whereas you would be using the same funds for 2 separate periods, which is not allowed. A Malta enterprise loan will not be considered as match financing under this scheme, no. Is refurbishing of offices and boardroom be considered under the scheme? While the concept itself might be considered as eligible, it will be tied to what the items actually are. If you want to plaster or you want to make a gypsum wall, it's not equipment really, is it? However, if you want to overhaul your existing furniture within the boardroom and perhaps install a video conferencing equipment, then yes, potentially it is eligible. However, again, you would need to consider whether you would be able to reach the minimum threshold of, in reality, it's 20,000, because we would cover the 50% of it, i.e. the 10,000. How many applications can be submitted by each company? 1 at a time, essentially. Massimo, are motor vehicles eligible to commercial or even not commercial? This entirely depends on the context, as well as the sector the applicant operates in. If they are operating themselves within the transport sector is ineligible. And if you want to know what the transport sector includes, particularly in terms of NACE codes, there is a specific definition on what NACE codes, within the guidance notes, a specific definition of what NACE codes the transport sector is considered to form part of. If your enterprise is not in the transport sector, however, you require a motor vehicle as part of your equipment, you need a forklift within your warehouse, for example, then yes, it would be eligible. However, again, it must be kept in mind, in this particular instance, not the amount, because I would imagine that the amount would be reached. However, if you still have to order, if the car agent still has to order the car from abroad, there will be question marks as to whether it will be received within the 3-month period required within the scheme. So that is worth keeping in mind as well. Scheme cover technologies for digitalization of services. I would suggest that you consider applying under the SME digitalization scheme. There is this the link to the website containing the documents about the scheme. So to answer Ms. Mifsud, if your project will cost 1 million, the maximum that we can give you is still 120K. So my recommendation would be find the piece, the most expensive item, and apply for it, because anything else will not be able to be covered under the scheme. This is a cash grant. This is not a tax credit or a tax incentive. You will be given the money back once that you have complied with the scheme requirements, and actually the item that you bought has been was from one of the quotations provided, and the transaction was finalized within the 3-month period. Once an application has been approved for aid, they will be the applicants will be requested to sign a grant agreement, at which point a brief meeting will be held with our scheme administrator, wherein they will explain the requirements, the filing requirements, bank transaction requirements, and so on and so forth. Is the equipment required to be energy efficient? There is no specific requirement for it to be explicitly energy efficient. However, at selection criteria stage, marks are assigned to that particular aspect. Answering Gilbert, the 3-month period starts once the grant agreement is signed. So assuming that an applicant starts work on collecting the information about their application today, gathering quotations, gathering the tax compliance certificates, and so on and so forth, and an application is submitted by the 13th of February, the board will then evaluate all applications received. This generally takes between 2 to 4 weeks, sometimes even less. And if an application is successful, they will be invited to sign the grant agreement. All things being equal, this would probably be around the start of March. And the 3-month period would be triggered from the date that the grant agreement, the contract is signed. Yes, answering Theodora, an SME is always to take into consideration whether an applicant is an SME or not. Linked and partner enterprises have to be taken into consideration. For the benefit of those who do not know what a linked or partner enterprise is, if Mark Muscat owns Mark Muscat Company Limited, Mark Muscat Enterprises, and Mark Muscat and Sons, they would be considered as linked enterprises if they operate in the same or adjacent market. So yes, linked and partner enterprises are taken into consideration when assessing if an undertaking applying for aid is indeed an SME. I believe I've addressed everybody's questions. If not, feel free to write in the chat what exactly you are requesting.
I think there's no more questions. I've also posted a form and I'll post it again, just so that if you have any feedback, just fill it in. It's just a small questionnaire. Thank you for participating in this session. Thank you, Mark, as well.
Thank you as well.
I hope you found it helpful, and if you wish to recommend or know of any other SMEs who wish to join such a session, there will be a second one organized on the 2nd of February, giving the same information basically. And if you need any assistance when it comes to the applications, writing the application, feel free to contact them, and we can also support you in this regard. I think Tommaso has the very last question. Maybe Tommaso, you can write the question and then we can conclude.
Quotation from online shops are acceptable. Yes, however, it's important that for quotations taken, let me rephrase, market testing is the best word, because market testing means that you've gone onto the market and ensured what the item actually cost. You didn't actually get a quotation from an individual in that way. What needs to be included in an online quotation is the URL from which the price was taken, as well as the date of the quotation. This can be very easily accomplished, not by taking a screenshot, which will not include the date or the URL, but by printing the web page as a PDF, which will include the URL. It will automatically include the date, and it will also, most importantly, include the technical specifications of the item itself for the board, in order to be able to determine that the item being quoted is indeed comparable to the other 2 or more quotations. Excellent. I seem to be clear.
Yes, I think even Gilbert has one last question.
bank statement, to bluntly, bank statement showing clearly the owner.
Okay, thank you very much. So just a kind reminder about the form. We would appreciate if you could fill it in just to have your feedback on the session. Apart from that, thank you very much, and I hope you found this useful.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye to all then. Bye-bye.